Have you ever looked at someone and thought, I'll never become like them? Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was a teacher. Maybe it was someone who bullied you, someone who lied to you, someone who controlled you, someone who hurt you, and you promised yourself, I will never become that person. But what happens years later, when you suddenly notice yourself doing something they used to do? You become more controlling. You start hiding things. You manipulate situations. You become emotionally distant. And suddenly, you recognize something you hate. A part of them is inside you. This is one of the most uncomfortable parts of human psychology. Sometimes the people we hate the most can influence us more than the people we love. And Lelouch v. Britannia is a fascinating example of this. Lelouch spends much of his life fighting against his father, Charles. He hates Charles's lies. He hates his manipulation. He hates the way Charles treats human beings as pieces in a larger plan. But as Lelouch gains power, he begins using some of the same methods. So why does this happen? And more importantly, can we stop ourselves from becoming the people who hurt us? To understand Lelouch's psychology, we have to start with Charles. Lelouch doesn't simply dislike his father. He sees Charles as one of the main reasons his childhood was destroyed. His mother is murdered. Nunnally is traumatized. Lelouch and Nunnally are sent away. And when Lelouch searches for answers, he discovers a father who seems more interested in his own vision of the world than the suffering of his children. Charles represents everything Lelouch hates: power without compassion, control without trust, and a world built around manipulation. Lelouch makes a decision. He will destroy Britannia. He will create a better world. And most importantly, he refuses to become like his father. At least, that's what he believes. This happens in real life too. Sometimes we build our identity around what we don't want to become. I'll never treat my children like that. I'll never be controlling. I'll never lie to people. I'll never become arrogant. I'll never hurt someone the way they hurt me. There's nothing wrong with learning from negative experiences. In fact, it's healthy to recognize behavior we don't want to repeat. But there's a psychological problem. When we focus intensely on avoiding something, we can sometimes become obsessed with the very thing we're trying to escape. And there's another problem. We may reject the behavior consciously, while still learning the behavior unconsciously. Human beings learn from observation. Children watch parents. Students watch teachers. Employees watch managers. Friends influence friends. People don't only learn from what others tell them. They learn from what others do. If someone grows up around constant aggression, they may learn that aggression is how conflicts are handled. If someone grows up around manipulation, they may learn that manipulation is how you get what you want. If someone grows up around emotional silence, they may learn that vulnerability is dangerous. This doesn't mean someone is destined to repeat those behaviors. It means those behaviors become familiar. And familiar behaviors are often easier to reproduce. That's why breaking unhealthy patterns requires more than simply saying, I'll never become like them. You have to learn something else. What will I do instead? Imagine someone grows up with a controlling parent. As an adult, they say, I'll never control my partner. But when they become afraid of losing that person, they start checking their phone. They become suspicious. They demand constant reassurance. They slowly become controlling. They didn't consciously decide, I want to become like my parent. They reacted to fear using a behavior they already knew. That's an important psychological distinction. Sometimes we're not repeating the person, we're repeating the pattern. And patterns can survive even when we hate where they came from. This is exactly where Lelouch becomes interesting. Lelouch grows up experiencing powerlessness. He loses his mother. He cannot protect Nunnally. His father makes decisions that completely change his life. He is sent away. He has almost no control over what happens to him. Then Geass enters his life. Suddenly, Lelouch can control people. He can change situations. He can force outcomes. He can fight against people much more powerful than himself. And control becomes incredibly important to him. This doesn't necessarily mean Lelouch consciously thinks, I want to become like Charles. It's more complicated. He experienced powerlessness, then discovered that power could protect him from feeling powerless again. That's a pattern we can see in real life. Sometimes people who experienced a lack of control become extremely controlling later, not because they want to hurt others, but because control makes them feel safe. Lelouch often tells himself that he's doing things to protect people, Nunnally, his friends, the people fighting Britannia. But protection has a dangerous boundary. At some point, protecting someone can become controlling them. You might think, I'm only doing this because I know what's best for you. But that sentence contains a hidden assumption. You believe you have the right to decide what is best for another person. Lelouch struggles with this. He makes decisions for other people. He hides information from them. He decides what they should know. He assumes that carrying the burden himself is better. His intentions may be understandable, but good intentions don't automatically make control healthy. This is uncomfortable, but the people who hurt us can teach us behaviors, not necessarily because they intentionally teach us, but because we observe them. Imagine someone repeatedly insults you. You learn that insults are powerful. Someone manipulates you. You learn how manipulation works. Someone uses silence to punish you. You learn that silence can control people. Someone threatens you. You learn that fear can change behavior. Later, you may use some of those same methods, not because you approve of them, because you learned them. That's why awareness matters. If you don't recognize the pattern, you might repeat it automatically. Lelouch's anger toward Britannia gives him direction. Anger can be powerful. It can help you recognize injustice. It can motivate you to change something. But anger can also become part of your identity. You stop thinking, I am angry about what happened, and start thinking, I am the person who fights against them. There's a difference. When anger becomes your identity, letting go can feel like losing yourself. You might think, if I stop hating them, then what was everything I suffered for? That's a difficult psychological trap, because sometimes people don't want to release their anger, not because they enjoy suffering, but because the anger has become connected to meaning. Here's one of the great ironies of revenge. You might think revenge means escaping someone, but psychologically, you may remain connected to them. You think about them. You plan against them. You imagine defeating them. You measure your progress against them. They become part of your identity. In a strange way, the person you hate can continue controlling your life even after they're gone. That's why moving forward isn't always the same as winning. Sometimes moving forward means building an identity that no longer revolves around the person who hurt you. Lelouch hates Charles's manipulation, yet Lelouch becomes a master manipulator. He hates lies, yet he lies constantly. He hates people being treated as tools, yet he sometimes treats people like pieces on a chessboard. He hates people who believe they know what's best for everyone, yet he frequently makes decisions for others. This doesn't make Lelouch a hypocrite in the simplest sense. It makes him human. Because human beings are full of contradictions, we can recognize a behavior as harmful and still repeat it. We can criticize something in another person while carrying a smaller version of the same flaw. That's why self-awareness matters. There's another psychological concept worth understanding: projection. Sometimes people have difficulty accepting certain qualities in themselves, so they become especially sensitive to those qualities in others. For example, someone who secretly feels insecure might become extremely critical of arrogant people. Someone who fears being weak might despise weakness in others. Someone who hates being controlled might become controlling themselves. This doesn't mean every criticism is projection, but sometimes the things that trigger us most can tell us something about ourselves. And that's a powerful question to ask. Why does this behavior bother me so much? The answer might reveal something you haven't confronted yet. So, how do you stop yourself from becoming the person who hurt you? The first step is awareness. You can't change a pattern you don't recognize. Ask yourself, what behavior did I learn from my environment? Not just the positive behavior. The negative behavior too? Maybe you learned to avoid conflict. Maybe you learned to hide emotions. Maybe you learned to become aggressive. Maybe you learned to manipulate. Maybe you learned that asking for help is weakness. Then ask, is this actually who I want to be? Because something being familiar doesn't mean it's healthy. Here's another important lesson. Saying, I won't become like them, isn't enough. You need an alternative. Instead of, I'll never control people. Learn, I'll communicate my concerns without controlling their choices. Instead of, I'll never be emotionally distant. Learn, I'll communicate when I'm struggling. Instead of, I'll never manipulate people. Learn, I'll ask directly for what I need. Instead of, I'll never become weak. Learn, I can be vulnerable without losing my strength. You don't break a pattern simply by removing it. You replace it. Lelouch becomes stronger. But strength isn't always the same as health. You can become more disciplined and more emotionally closed, more confident and more arrogant, more independent and more isolated, more strategic and less trusting. That's why personal growth needs balance. The goal isn't to become the opposite of the person who hurt you. The goal is to become yourself, a healthier version of yourself. Your past can explain your behavior, but it doesn't have to excuse it, and it doesn't have to determine it. You may have learned unhealthy patterns, but learned patterns can be unlearned. You can pause before reacting. You can question your instincts. You can apologize. You can change how you communicate. You can choose something different. This is where real growth begins. Not when you say, "I'm nothing like them," but when you can honestly say, "I recognize that behavior in myself and I'm going to change it." Lelouch's story eventually moves beyond revenge. He realizes that simply destroying his enemies won't automatically create a better world. He has to think about what comes afterward. That is an important psychological transition. Revenge asks, "How can I hurt the person who hurt me?" Responsibility asks, "How can I prevent this cycle from continuing?" Those are completely different questions. And perhaps that's one of the greatest lessons we can take from Lelouch. You don't break a cycle by defeating the person who started it. You break it by refusing to continue it. Lelouch spent his life fighting against a world created by people he hated. He hated lies. He hated manipulation. He hated control. He hated the way powerful people treated others like pieces. And yet, as he gained power, he began using some of those same methods. That's the uncomfortable truth about human psychology. Sometimes the people we hate can influence us more than the people we admire. We learn from what we experience. We copy what we see. We develop defenses. And sometimes those defenses follow us long after the danger is gone. But that doesn't mean we're trapped. You are not your past. You are not the person who hurt you. And you don't have to become them. Maybe you've learned to hide your emotions. You can learn to communicate. Maybe you've learned to control people. You can learn to trust. Maybe you've learned to respond with anger. You can learn to pause. Maybe you've learned to protect yourself by pushing everyone away. You can learn to let people in. The goal isn't to become the opposite of the person who hurt you. The goal is to become someone who chooses their behavior consciously, because sometimes the greatest victory over the person who hurt you isn't revenge. It's becoming someone they could never make you become. You don't have to repeat the pattern. You can be the person who ends it. And perhaps that's the real lesson behind Lelouch. The world may shape you. Your past may influence you. But eventually, you get to choose what you become.